Many bad games released in 2022, but fortunately there were also some really good ones. I have played a lot of games this year because I am a complete shut-in. Like seriously, this has to be on the level of a mental illness. So for this video I am going to channel this intense and deep depression into a series of game recommendations for you. This list will be in no particular order. All of them are great games and it would be too difficult to rank them. Let's get started. Pentiment is a really interesting choice-based narrative game. You play as a guy, and this guy finds himself investigating a series of murders in a village. This is kind of a cool premise, because murder is scary, even though podcasts have now ruined it. I feel like if you become a cold case nowadays, it's kind of corny. In the past, they would have made a movie about you, but now instead you get a 20-episode podcast where like 5 wine mums talk about how they think your brother did it. The really cool part of Pentiment is seeing the consequences of your actions. It takes place over a long time period, and as a result you get to see the full cause and effect of choices you make. If you accuse a certain person of committing a murder and they are found guilty, they will not be in the rest of the game. Other characters might be promoted to their former job, and their family will be forced to live without them. It really makes you think about each and every one of your actions, because the consequences are repeatedly reinforced throughout every hour of the game. It's not like in a normal RPG game, where your choices will have consequences, but it won't really matter too much because you will never return to those characters or that place. In Pentiment, you will constantly walk past the people you may have potentially wronged, or righted, if that is even a word. This is a game that is very easy to recommend. At first, when you look at footage of TUNIC, you will think, oh wow, this looks really boring. This looks like one of those generic indie Zelda-inspired games, probably with the word Souls in its name, and you'll find a post-mortem about it on the game dev subreddit where they failed to sell enough copies. But it turns out this is completely incorrect. TUNIC is an incredibly unique and complex game despite how it may look. It has far more in common with games like The Outer Wilds, The Witness, and Fez than something like Zelda. Without me spoiling anything, TUNIC has this incredible meta puzzle element to its gameplay that consistently recontextualizes many aspects of the game's world, and part of this relates back to the amazing in-game manual. A good portion of the game's progression is actually knowledge-based, kind of like learning how to wall jump in Super Metroid or quitting mid-execution in Call of Duty. So you are allowed to perform some interesting sequence breaks if you pay enough attention to everything. But if you fail to discover certain mechanics, you can eventually use the manual to try and puzzle them out, which is a very fun and unique experience. If you decide to give this game a shot, pay close attention to everything around you. Teardown is an incredible video game. It speaks to that innate primal sense of destruction inherent to all of humanity. We love to break things. We love hitting things with hammers, blowing things up, and lighting things on fire. And so for that reason, I think it's fair to say that on a human level, Teardown is us, and we are Teardown. The environments in this game are so beautiful. It's genuinely fun to walk through the levels and check out all of these small details. I would compare it to something like Hitman, in that they are both tourism simulators, but with a side of terrorism. Both developers really have an amazing eye for architecture, and this results in places that are really fun to destroy. The campaign for Teardown is also really fun. You would think that being prevented from breaking stuff in a game about breaking stuff would be boring, but it is so fulfilling trying to puzzle out a unique route between the objectives, and absolutely disrespecting everyone's property along the way. The sandbox mode of Teardown is where the game truly shines. It is so fun just lighting stuff on fire and watching it burn, or wondering what would happen if you destroyed all of the supports on this tower, and then attached a rocket to the bottom of it, and then turned it on. Teardown never gets old and is absolutely worth your time. Patrick's Parabox appears to be a simple Sokoban puzzle game, but then you see its gimmick, and it's like, wow, recursion is cool. Kind of like that other game, Recursed. But as you get further into Patrick's Parabox, you quickly discover how intricate its central mechanic can get. There are some really crazy looking puzzles, which will no doubt remind you of that time you went in on a cactus and found yourself on a vision quest in the desert. It also has this absolutely mind-breaking moment when you beat the game, because you realize, oh, so that's why it's called Patrick's Parabox. So if you are someone who is a fiend for games like Steven's Sausage Roll, Barbara Is You, or The Witness, Patrick's Parabox is definitely worth checking out. Chop Goblins is an incredible game that features intense ruminations on the ultimate fate of the human race. Every second of gameplay is breathtaking and awe-inspiring. You will cry tears of true fulfillment. It is ultimately a game about goblins that chop, and the lives that they change when they chop. The Stanley Parable Ultra Deluxe is probably a game. It might even be a remake or a definitive edition, or maybe even a sequel. You really cannot tell, and that's the most appealing aspect of this game. The original Stanley Parable was a mod for Half-Life 2. It was a short and fun choose-your-own-adventure game. Then the Stanley Parable was a remake of the original mod with some differences, and now there is this. Whatever this is. When it was first announced and up until its release, people had no idea what it was supposed to be. It was never really made clear by the marketing, and that's what makes Ultra Deluxe so great in comparison to the other versions. It's a very mind-bending game that loves to toy with your expectations, and this permeates every aspect of the marketing and presentation of the product. As a result, the act of purchasing the game is a part of the gameplay, but it goes further than that. The content of the game is incredibly self-referential. At times this can be comedic, but it can also be rather thought-provoking, and through being self-referential, it actually builds upon the game's own real-world marketing to deliver the narrative. A very core part of the game's story is that it actively acknowledges that the game may or may not be a sequel, and that you the player had no idea what it was going into it. It is just so cool and imaginative, and definitely worth your time. Elder Kings is a mod for Crusader Kings 3 that makes the world of Skyrim 2 playable. Honestly, I prefer playing it over the base game Crusader Kings 3. It just adds so much variety to the game, and if you are really into the Elder Scrolls franchise, there are so many small little nods that only people who have completely fried their brain by endlessly browsing new ESP will understand. If you are someone that insists on running mods like this in Skyrim, then you will be happy to hear that Elder Kings supports this feature right out of the gate. You absolute weirdo. My favorite thing to do in the mod is probably just making weird looking guys. The amazing character models really leverage Crusader Kings 3's genetic systems to great effect. There is also still so much room for player expression outside of the characters. You have access to all of the religions and cultures of the Elder Scrolls, from the more mysterious ones to the troglodytes. So if you have ever wanted to do a troglodyte roleplay, you should absolutely give this mod a try. Live Alive is a remake of an old JRPG that was called Live Alive. Now I'm sure some nerd is watching this and thinking, oh wait, that's the game that partially inspired parts of Undertale partially. Yeah, I guess. But Live Alive is a lot more than that. The original version was untranslated and people like me could only play the fan-translated version, which was still great, but this fully localized 3D remake is next level. Live Alive was quite unique for a JRPG of its time. There are multiple stories you can pick and they all play fairly differently from each other. Once you complete one, you move on to another with a whole new cast of characters and setting. One story might involve you playing as a kung fu master and choosing who he passes his martial arts onto, while another will have you playing as a robot in space with very little combat gameplay. It's all really cool and quite unique, and the 3D upgrade looks so good. If you are a fan of JRPGs, this is worth checking out. Elden Ring is a video game. A lot of people like this video game. I've made a handful of videos about this video game. It's kind of like the Dark Souls of video games. The case of the Golden Idol is very reminiscent of Return of the Obra Dinn, only the art looks disgusting, but in a good way. It's like the smell of diesel. There's something oddly intoxicating about it. At first I felt kind of repulsed by it, but as I played the game, I got used to it, and now I really like it. It's great. Each level is a murder mystery that you have to solve. You can inspect items throughout the environment and listen to what the suspects have to say. Then you organize keywords you have collected to work out what exactly happened. This keyword system works really well because it stops you from just guessing answers like you can do in other similar games, as if you were some monkey writing Hamlet. The art works really well to set up this uncanny feeling. It really comes to a head in some levels. For example, this creepy mask level. This was genuinely scary for some reason. I know it looks really goofy, but the soundtrack was really tense and creepy for this level. It also has a really cool meta-narrative between the different mysteries. Believe it or not, it involves a golden idol and a case of it. I think maybe it could have been a little bit better if they had a massive level that links them all together gameplay-wise. They do this a little bit in the last level, but they don't take it as far as they could have. But it's still a really excellent mystery game that is absolutely worth your time. SIGNALIS is a great survival horror game. It hits all of the notes. You have survival and you have horror. The gameplay really hones in on what makes this genre work. You spend a large amount of time in each zone exploring and backtracking through them. There is a large amount of interesting files to read and fun puzzles to solve. You also have to scavenge for more tools, ammo, and healing items so that you can survive. The horror. The game has a very defined and striking art style. The incredibly sleek UI works as a perfect companion for the lo-fi graphics. The cutscenes and Call of Duty sequences are very beautiful. Symbolic art is also used to great effect when it comes to the themes. At first you might think it will be corny, but it really isn't. An amazing amount of thought and care has gone into the imagery that they show you. It is absolutely rewarding to go back over and look at all of the images that only appear for a handful of frames throughout the entire game. However, I still have not worked out one thing. I cannot understand why items kept appearing in toilets. I simply do not know what themes they were trying to communicate through this. I also made a really long video on it, so if you want to know more about the game, feel free to watch it. Entropy Zero 2 is a sequel to, believe it or not, Entropy Zero. These are both mods for Half-Life 2 that have you playing as a Combine soldier who just rips and tears. The second one is a massive step up from the first. It accurately simulates being a member of a police force. You truly are protecting and serving. The story is loosely based on a proposal for the third Half-Life game, and I feel like they do it justice, even with all the corny lines that are in it.
Going down. I'll never complain about an elevator being too slow ever again.
There is this really cool side quest over the course of the entire game. It's basically the Gnome achievement from Half-Life Episode 2, where you have to take an object from early in the game and carry it through to the last level. Only this one is a robot that actually talks. There is a massive amount of entirely unique dialogue dedicated to this side quest that you will never see if you don't take the robot with you, and it's not even an annoying task. It really elevates the game, and I think it's quite unique. This is definitely a mod that is worth checking out. Nobody Saves the World is an interesting take on the action RPG genre. You play as a nobody, and this nobody can turn into a wide variety of somebodies, all with their own unique abilities that you can mix and match. You unlock new abilities and forms by completing challenges, which is quite a fun progression system. There is also this open world for you to explore and do quests in with quite a few hidden secrets. The main reason I find this game so good is that it's just really nailed the progression. All of the different forms are basically entire classes, and there is so much customization you can do within each archetype, and all of this occurs within a fairly streamlined and straightforward system, which isn't necessarily a good thing or a bad thing when it comes to ARPGs, but in this specific case it works pretty well. Nobody Saves the World isn't as unique or game-changing as some of the other entries in this video, but it is just competently executed. It's a fun game, simple as. Tactics Ogre Reborn is a remake of an old game called Tactics Ogre. It features a really robust strategy layer to its gameplay, but it really shines in its story. Without saying much, it is not your generic anime RPG story. You get to make some decisions with really complex ramifications. I'm talking war crime tier, so if you want a deep strategy RPG with an equally deep story, check out Tactics Ogre Reborn. Marvel's Midnight Suns might look look kind of boring, because it's superheroes, but if they were a strategic turn-based card game. But it's really good. The writing is absolutely Marvel, which is not really a good thing. However, the gameplay is where it really shines. It's just really fun working out good card combos, and taking advantage of the environment to destroy normal working class people, who are only here for the paycheck and health insurance. Midnight Suns is definitely worth playing. Fear and Hunger Termina is the follow-up to a somewhat obscure game called Fear and Hunger. It's basically a hardcore survival horror turn-based RPG, and it's really unique. It's an incredibly open-ended experience that is extremely replayable. There is a large amount of choices you can make that lead to very different outcomes, along with a whole host of endings. The story takes place in a forsaken town where a nightmarish festival is being held. Your train breaks down on the outskirts and you are forced to play the game of this old god. There are 14 people with you on the train, and the aim of the festival is to narrow that down to 1, through having them fight each other or fall victim to the town and its inhabitants. You can choose to what extent you participate in this. Maybe you try to win by taking out everyone else, or bide your time and see if you can find another solution. There are 8 entirely different characters that you can play as. One of them is your standard issue puncher guy, but you also have a dancing mage, and someone who straight up uses a wheelchair. They all have their own unique stories, and the ones that you don't pick will show up as fully fleshed out NPCs, which you can recruit or fight. It also has an incredibly deep and obscure story. There are so many things going on behind the scenes that you can puzzle out as you play through it, and many mechanics that you might not even know exist until you do another playthrough. The entire game was made by one person, and despite this, it's actually a pretty long game, with a massive amount of high quality art. Now you are probably wondering, if this game is so great, why aren't more people talking about it? Well, there are 2 main reasons. It's a game that requires a lot of patience. I wouldn't necessarily call it hard, but it can be quite unforgiving, so you will quite often want to reload saves. I honestly like this because it really helps you to learn the game and test out every single thing you can do with it, but some people could easily get very frustrated with it. The second reason is that this game is very edgy. On the Steam page, there are a whole bunch of content warnings that are fairly accurate. None of it actually feels that gratuitous though. It all serves the atmosphere and the themes of the game, but it can absolutely be uncomfortable for some people. I would say that it's no worse than a dark horror movie. It also means that it can be difficult for people to make videos about it, which is very disappointing, because I honestly believe that this game could see success on the level of something like Lisa or maybe even Omori. Termina is such an incredibly deep and unique video game, and it absolutely deserves more attention. This is one of those games that when you play it, you become incredibly depressed or motivated. Not because the story and the themes made you feel that way, but because you have never made something this good, and that feeling causes you to desperately want to make something on its level. Kind of like Katamari. Katamari has many levels filled with fun rolling action. You can roll up items, you can roll up people, you can roll up cars, you can roll up buildings, and you can roll up islands. What an amazing video game, but unfortunately it did not release in 2022, so I cannot include it in this video. I apologize, my fellow clump spirits. If you are wondering why some games are not in this video, like God of War, it's probably because I did not play it. Feel free to list any of your personal games of the year in the comments section. If you enjoyed this video, you should subscribe to my channel. It would look great on your resume.